praise the name of the Lord. I want to share a message with you today. The biblical narrative is a bit lengthy, but I think we will be able to bear it on this Mother's Day. I want to read from the New International Version, 1 Kings chapter 3, beginning with verse number 16. As I solicit your prayers, the sacred writing reads as follows. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, no, the living one is my son. The dead one is yours. But the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. The king said, this one says, my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other. The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him. But the other said, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling. Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is the mother. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Those of you that have stood for the reading of the word may be seated in the presence of the Lord. I want to highlight just for a moment and lift from the biblical writ. I want to highlight verse number 26, just a portion of it. The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son. And I just want to talk to you this morning on this Mother's Day about a mother's love. Mothers, today we honor you. I do not say that lightly. I say that with a ton of respect, admiration, enthusiasm, and regard for your place in this world. You are God's gift to family. And today we proudly salute each of you for your continued efforts to turn our boys into men, our girls into women, and our men into the man that God intended them to be. We honor you with this day. However, this day is not enough to speak of the lasting contributions you continue to make in our homes, our communities, and in our churches. You have undoubtedly, unquestionably, been the backbone of our families. You have been the stabilizers in our marriages. You have been the nurturers of our children. You've been the equalizers in our community, the builders of our churches, and the cultivators of our spirit. Without you, mamas, grandmamas, and big mamas, our sunny days would have been a lot less sunny. Our dark nights would have been a lot darker. Our sad times would have been a lot sadder. And our celebrations would have been a lot less celebrative. You love us with such unconditional and irrevocable presence. Your love has sustained the worst of us. Your love has supported the best of us. Your love has cheered the greatest of us and has encouraged the least of us. And I want to lightly examine a passage that highlights a mother's love. I want to examine a passage in the Bible that illustrates what it means to be a mother and the unusual love that a mother has for her children. I know it's a strange kind of setting in which to dive into, examine such love. We are in King Solomon's courtroom, and in front of us is standing two prostitutes with a discrepancy over rights to a baby. It is in fact a child custody case that has gone and turned terribly wrong. One of the mothers brings the case before King Solomon. They are standing there in front of Solomon and tell him the story that has brought them to him for this hearing. They had been handling their business when their business started handling them, and they ended up pregnant. The text doesn't say if these two women planned to get pregnant together or if it just happened that way, but they both had babies around the same time, within 3 days of each other. They both lived in the same house, and they both might have had their baby by the same man. They stand before Solomon and state their case before him. They both had given birth to sons, and during the night, one of the mothers lay on her son, and the baby died. The woman whose son had died switched her dead baby, with the baby of the mother as she slept. The other woman, seeking justice, took the matter before King Solomon, and she stated her case. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the two of us. And during the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I slept, and she put her dead son, next to me by my breast. And then the next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son that I had born, not the son that I had given birth to. And so Solomon, being as wise as he was, could not tell from their words which woman was telling the truth. After all, this was in a day before there was any DNA testing, no parental testing to see who the baby belonged to. Instead, Solomon gathered all of his divine wisdom, and he said, "Bring me a sword. Cut the living child in two and give half to one and give half of the baby to the other." And after he said this, the woman whose son was still alive said, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him." And however, the woman whose son had died answered, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." And based on their responses, Solomon knew the identity of the true mother, saying, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is the mother." So that, watch this as we get ready to grapple with the text. Solomon knew that by watching the responses of the two women and relying on the maternal instincts of the true mother, he could determine who the real mother was. And it was the mother's love that revealed whose son this really was. Because we cannot overlook the fact that the text says this woman deeply loved her son. And when you look at the love this mother has for her child, the first thing that is apparent in the text is that these two women were prostitutes. These were women of the night that were having this custody battle. They were a part of the oldest profession in the world. These were streetwalkers, corner hustlers, ladies of the night. And it was one woman's love for her child that made her seek Solomon. In fact, like many other women in the Bible, the two women in this story are anonymous. The women seem to be poor. They live alone in a shared residence without servants. And as prostitutes, they lack male patronage and have to take care of themselves in a patriarchal society. The women's designation as prostitutes is necessary as background to the plot. It clarifies why the women live alone and gave birth alone and were alone during the alleged switch of the babies. It clarifies why the women are not represented by their husbands, as is customary in biblical society. Prostitutes in biblical society were considered functional widows, for they have no male patron to represent them in court, and their sons are considered fatherless. They are socially marginalized and deprived of the right to advocacy. They can only seek justice from one place, and that one place is God. And embodied in the story as the resource and as the source of Solomon's wisdom is God. So that I remind you again that they were prostitutes. But don't let the fact that they were prostitutes stop you from seeing the beauty in the story, because this mother reminds us that even the child that is brought into this world illegitimately and under the most unusual circumstances deserves to be loved. It ain't the baby's fault that his mother chose such an occupation. It ain't the baby's fault that his mama acted irresponsibly. It ain't the baby's fault that his mother couldn't control her passions. It ain't the baby's fault that these things occurred. Or maybe she had him on purpose because she felt so unloved by men that saw her as nothing more than an object to be used rather than a person to be loved, that she decided that if no one would love her, at least she would bring someone in this world that she could love. So she decided to have a baby, because where men just looked at her as something to be used, she said, well, I'll have something that even when I love him, he'll be able to love me back. What I'm trying to tell you this morning is that every child deserves to live, and every child, no matter how they arrive on the planet, every child deserves to be loved, no matter how they got here. Oh, I tell you, there are no illegitimate children. There are some illegitimate behaviors by some illegitimate parents, but God teaches us through the love of this prostitute that her baby, that no child should live without the love of his parents. So that, watch this, because more importantly, it's a mother's love that keeps our children alive. It's not the money they make that keeps them alive. It's not the cars they drive that keeps our children alive. It's not the toys we give them that keeps them alive, but it is the love of a mother that keeps their children alive. I mean, when I was at my lowest and you were at your lowest too, when your world was falling apart and was dead or dying in your life, you didn't know what to do or where to turn, and your mind was confused because you didn't know whether you were coming or going. Listen, it was mama you ran to with tears running down your face and snot coming out of your nose and fear of filling your heart. You told mama, and she laid your snotty nose and teary eyes on her bosom and said, baby, don't worry, mama got you. Mama got you. It's gonna be all right. Maybe y'all haven't been perfect all your life. Maybe you've been perfect all your life and did everything right and ain't never had no problems, but not me. When my world was crushed and I didn't know where to run to, I'll tell you where I ran. I ran to mama. You say you big baby, and I say yep, but it was mama that prayed for me. It was mama that was there for me. It was mama that fed me when I was hungry. It was mama that took care of me when I was sick. It was mama that cooked my rice pudding and made me the hot rolls and put butter on them. It was mama that loved me when nobody else would. It was mama that loved me when nobody else could. Mama kept me alive. And I'm not the only one. But there's some folks sitting in here this morning that if it had not been for the love of your mama, you would have gone crazy. If it had not been for the love of your mama, you'd still be in the hospital. If it had not been for the love of your mama, you would have died a long time ago. If it had not been for a mother's love. I'm not going to be long. But Solomon said, bring me a sword. Cut the baby in half. But the mother's love said, no, keep him alive. I'll give him away first before I watch him die. And do you not know that there are mothers on the planet today, and mothers in our cities, and mothers in our communities, and even in our churches today that love their children so much that they would rather give them up than watch them die? They love them so much that mama said that before I see you die in those streets, boy, I will give you to another woman and let her hold you, whose dimensions are about 8 by 8, and that you can't go out on your own, but I'll give you up first before I watch you die. This is a child custody case, and they are in court before King Solomon. And they tell the story of how they had a baby 3 days apart, and how they went to bed one night and they both had their baby in bed with them, when the text literally says that the other woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. This is about all I'm going to tell you this morning. But he died because she lay on him. She rolled over on her baby while she was in bed with him and he with her, and she smothered her child with her own body. She killed the baby because she was too close to the baby. She smothered him. I'm just about ready to sit down. But can I help you? Can I help you? Can I help your mama? Can I help your daddy? Because might I suggest that there are some mothers who are killing their babies because they are smothering, because they are smothering them. We've got to be careful, mothers, when in the love we have for our babies, that we don't go from mothering to smothering. We got to be careful that we don't take our babies that we have carried for 9 months and somewhere along the line we go from mothering them to smothering them. We get the two mixed up. You believe yourselves to be the absolute center of your child's universe, the one and only son around which her or his happiness and well-being revolves. Stay with me. Sometimes mothering becomes smothering, and you've got to be careful how you approach that which you have birthed, that which you have given life to, because for your affection for it, you might end up killing it. Can I sit down beside you for just a moment? Scoot over and then lean in, because he's 34 years old and he's still bringing his laundry to your house to do his clothes. You've gone somewhere from mothering to smothering. No wonder he ain't got no wife. Can I preach like I feel it? No wonder he doesn't have a wife, because he still has his mother treating him like a boy, so he can't become the man that he was meant to be. He is 31 years old and still sleeping on your couch, playing Madden, talking about, Ma, can you bring me the Kool-Aid out the refrigerator? Somewhere you have gone from mothering to smothering. He is 28 years old and he's still living in your house, sleeping in your bed, eating your food, and he can't even make his own bed when he gets up in the morning. You got to make it for him. Somewhere in all of that, you have moved from mothering to smothering. He is 30 years old. I'm going to keep giving them to you until you get it. He is 30 years old and on a date with his woman. And he tells his date, I would have you come over, but let me call first and check with my mama to see if I can bring you by. Can I suggest to you that we have smothered our boys so much that we have stunted their growth and they could not grow up to become the men they were supposed to be because, mama, they're too close to you. Somewhere along the line, you got to give them a little room. You got to give, somebody say, give me a little room, please. You got to give them a little room because somewhere along the line, you got to let them grow up to be men. You got to let them stand on their own 2 feet. You got to let our children, not just our boys, but even our girls, you got to let them grow up to be the women and the men that God had called them to be. And somewhere we think that this intensive mothering scheme, this helicopter parenting, is the answer to today's children's problems, that we are around them, we give them everything, we do everything for them. We have termed it nowadays helicopter parenting, where we hover over our children 24 hours a day to protect them and care for them and aid our children. Our children, listen, we do something wrong, they do something wrong in school, and the principal wants to correct and discipline, and the first thing we do is run down to the school and say, principal, you need to leave my child alone. No, let that child deal with the discipline in the school that has to be done, and they'll grow up and realize sometimes the things that I do, I'm responsible for it, but, I'm a preach anyhow. I'm responsible for it by myself, and daddy ain't nowhere around, and mama can't help me. What I'm trying to suggest is that sometimes we got to let children make their mistakes. We got to let them go through the fire sometime. We got to let them go through the hard times. We got to let them go through the struggles of life and the difficulties on their own, so that they can have some character build up within them, and they can be the person that God ultimately wants them to be. At 55, they ain't going to call you and say, Daddy, can you come? What I want to suggest is sometimes children need to find their own way. Maybe that's why the Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes said, well, son, I'll tell you, life ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor. It's been bare. But all the time, I need you to know, son, that I's been a-climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps, because you find it's getting kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing, because life for me ain't been no crystal stair, and neither will it be for your children and your grandchildren, for your little boys and your little girls. You're going to discover that somewhere along the line a tack will hit them and a splinter will spring upon them, and they got to know how to deal with it for themselves. I'm just about ready to be done and sit down, but sometimes mothering becomes smothering, and sometimes, might I add, we smother them, but we smother them with stuff. Not with our bodies, but we smother them with stuff. Toys are good, but don't give them everything they want, because if you give them everything they want and everything they ask for, listen, they will have a hard time dealing with rejection later on in life, because they'll come to understand anything I want, I'm supposed to get. But mama, daddy, sometimes you got to say no. Sometimes you got to take the hard line and say, no, I said no, and I'm not going to back up from no, because somewhere along the line, if you don't teach them how to deal with rejection, somewhere along the line, I've lived long enough to understand that life don't always go the way you want it. Sometimes your plans get off course, and where you want to be, you'll find that you're someplace else, and rejection will come. And if you haven't learned how to deal with it when you're 4 and 5 and 8 and 9 and 12 and 14 and 17, when you get 37, now all of a sudden we got a problem on our hands because you don't know how to deal with rejection because you had your tantrum and you pouted and you got everything that you wanted. My mama used to say, boy, you better sit your behind down. You better put that back on the shelf. You better leave that in that store. But nowadays we feel we got to give them everything that they see. You know why? Maybe because we haven't given them everything that we are. So we have good artificial substitutes and imitation substitutes for us. We put stuff in there. Happy Mother's Day. Money is good. Money is good. Money is good. But let them get out every now and then. Put a rake in their hand in the fall, a shovel in their hand in the winter, and let them get out every now and then and work for some things on their own. Because if you don't, they will grow up and will think that later on in life that everything is supposed to be handed to them. But I've come to discover there's some things in your life you ain't gonna get unless you roll up your sleeves. Unless you punch a clock, unless you do your 8, there's some things you're not going to get in this life unless you decide to work for it. There's some things in this life you will never get. All right, watch. Do you not realize that real parenting takes place from one of 3 positions? Real parenting takes place from one of 3 positions. Either in front of you to cheer you on, behind you to have your back, or beside you so that you don't walk alone. Either in front, behind, or beside. But real parenting never takes place over you to smother you. Okay. This woman smothered her baby. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She killed her own baby in the night while the baby was close to her breast. So she did the only thing she knew how to do to correct the situation. Watch what she does. She takes her dead baby, walks over to where the living baby is with the living baby's mother. She takes the baby, slides it from out of the mother's arms that had cuddled it in the night, takes that baby out, holds it to her, and she takes the dead baby, puts that close to the mother's breast, and she takes and goes back to bed with the living baby's mother. She switched the babies. Be careful, because there are still those who are trying to switch your living child for a dead imitation. Let me help you. They want to make you think that your baby has died and there's no life in them. It's a lie. They switched him in our schools and are making us think that our babies have died academically and can't learn. I don't know how they slipped them out. Maybe it's when they took a prayer out of school, they slipped the baby out. And they're carrying our living baby, but have given us these dead babies, thinking that our babies have died academically and can't learn. They switched them in the job market and are making us think that our babies have died financially and that they are too lazy to work. They switched them in the courtroom and are making us think that our babies have died morally and that they are too bad to be any good. They switched them in the community and are making us think that our babies have died socially and that they are too corrupt to love. But I need you to know something today. That somewhere along the line, we got to love our babies. We got to love them regardless of what it looks like on the outside. We got to love our babies. We got to stay in there. We got to love them. You got to be able to look at your baby when the switch comes and tell the difference between your living child and the dead imitation. Mama said, when I got up in the morning and the morning light shined on my baby, I examined him real good and I discovered that that was not my baby. I looked at him in the light because I know what he looked like. I know his nose was like the man that made this baby. I know that his hair was curly like mine. I know that this baby that you say is mine ain't mine because my baby had my features. You work with me here. You got to know. All I'm trying to suggest is that you got to know your baby's features. You got to know what they look like. You got to know your baby's features. Not just the point of their nose or the curl or in their hair. Not just the way their lips look. You got to know their features, not just their physical features, but emotional and psychological and mental features well enough to know when somebody or something tries to switch that which you've given birth to, you can stand and say, that ain't my baby, that ain't my child, that's not what came from me. That ain't what came from me. Because the truth is, in the world we live in today, it is trying to have you cuddled beside something dead that you thought was alive. I'll never forget the time the man down the street told my mama that I had stolen something from him. My mama said, not my baby. She said, not my boy. Not my boy. Now, I might think that one of these other kids around here that's sitting, standing around here, and you talking about him, they might have done it. They might have done it, but not my child, because I know my son. I know how I raised him. I know what he looks like. I know how he acts. I know his character. I know what I put in him. I know how I carried him. I know what I brought him. I know how I raised him. And what I gave him is not the character that I see here. And so that ain't my child. He didn't do it. You know the amazing thing? She never even bothered to ask me if I did it or to question me about it because she knew my features. Can I just ask you, do you know your child's features? Do you spend enough time with them to know their features? Do you know their child's features? Do you know what they look like on the outside? I know you do. But do you know their features on the inside? Do you know, have you put some honesty in them? Have you put some truth in them? Have you given them a life of integrity? What kind of features did you put on the inside? Are they people of faith? Or do they understand the grace of God? Do they understand the mercy of God? Did you put the goodness of God in them? What kind of features do they have? What kind of character do they have? Are they noble? Are they right? Do they stand by truth? What kind of features do they have? So they watch this, and I promise I'm going to take my seat because it's already after hour. Watch this. I promise you. It says, this mother's love, watch this. She goes down to the courthouse, speaks to the judge, and the judge says, this one says, my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is alive and my son is dead and your son is dead and mine is alive. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword to the king, and he then gave an order, cut the living child in two, and gave half one to the other and half to the other, and cut the baby in two. Watch this. So the first woman said, cut him in half, because if I can't have him, nobody will. And the other woman, the real mother who loved her son, stands in defense of her son, stands in defense of her son, stands in defense of her son. I'm getting ready to take my seat. Stands in defense of her son as an advocate for her son, guards the life of her baby, stands in the gap and fights for his life. She says, because if you're going to kill him, if you're going to cut him in two and give us both halves, I'd rather see him live. I'll fight for him. I'll fight for his life. I won't fight for his death. But I'll fight for his life because I want him to live. And whatever it takes, I'm going to let him live. Before I see him dead, I will give him away first. And my point is, she fought for her child. She did whatever it took to keep her child from being in the wrong hands. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest to you before I take my seat is that like this loving mother, listen, we got to fight for our children. Listen, we got to stand as advocates for our babies. We got to guard them because while the world is trying to split them in two, and while there's swords of social swords and cultural swords and even now political swords that are trying to divide them, we got to fight for what we have given birth to. We got to put up a fight for our children. Nehemiah 4:14 says, and I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not afraid of them. When war was about to break out, he said, remember the Lord, which is great and which is terrible, and fight for your brethren. He says, and fight for your sons, and fight for your daughters, and fight for your wives, and fight for your houses. And I just wonder sometimes if we've given up the fight, or when I see our little brothers and our little sisters are locked up behind prison bars, I wonder if we have given up the fight. Or when I see the continued murders in our streets, I wonder if we have given up the fight. Or when I hear mothers crying in the streets because of a senseless violence that took out their child, I wonder if we've given up the fight. When I hear of hungry children, I wonder if we have given up the fight. When I hear of human trafficking, I wonder if we have given up the fight. When I see the high school dropout rate right here in our city, around 50%, I wonder if we have given up the fight. Well, I say to you mothers and to all those in the house that we cannot give up the fight. We got to do what we got to do. We got to go where we got to go. We got to stand where we got to stand. And if we fight, let me tell you, sometimes you got to give up what you're fighting for. But if you give it up, I'm here to tell you it'll come back to you. And praise be to God, as God is my witness, somewhere along the line, when you give up what you love, you don't lose it, but it'll come back to you. Yes.